Thanks for being here. You could be anywhere and you chose to be here. This is Lily, and this is Affirming Self. Guys, I am so excited to be with you today. Let me tell you, it's been quite the week where I feel like there's been a lot of blessings and a lot of opportunities to grow and to connect with myself in ways that I wouldn't expect. So I have this thing regarding I have this thing regarding time. Time is an incredibly important part of life for me, and it matters with a number of things that I do in life. However, I do this really great job of putting a lot of pressure on myself because I'm trying to be the best individual that I can be at things. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. However, I think that there can be a line where you can get too particular and it can actually end up hurting you. So that's why we're going to be talking about this episode today, which is the power of letting go of expectations. The power of letting go of expectations. Yes, I absolutely said that today. Here's the thing. It's important that we have expectations in the sense of we have goals for ourselves that we want to achieve. We want to live our best lives. That way we can make change for the better, not just for ourselves personally, but for other people around us. And how we do that is by developing ourselves so that way we can be our best self. I really want to talk about this subject regarding expectations because we all have expectations. Whether we want to acknowledge them or not, they're there. Whether it be spoken expectations that we might see, such as your parent or a teacher saying, I'd like for you to complete this homework up to this standard, or I'd like for you to do the laundry in a certain way. Those are certain guidelines and have certain steps and ways in which you should complete them, right? So those are expectations, those are spoken. And then there's these other expectations that are very much so unspoken, like in relationships. Whether or not we want to acknowledge it, it's true and they're there. We're exploring the quiet, sometimes challenging, always powerful process of letting go of expectations of ourselves, others, and even outcomes. So, what are expectations really? These come in a number of different forms. There's three main ones. I'd like to briefly touch on them. I'm not going to go into this huge explanation because I think that we get that there are three. And these three expectations come in the form of the following: culturally, personally, emotionally. There are three expectations that come in the form of the following: culturally, personally, and emotionally. What these could look like are the following. Just note that these are just some ideas. These are not a particular always fast rule. These are just some things that come to my mind when I stop and allow myself to think about it. Culturally might come in the form of how a school looks, or perhaps you have a family culture. Maybe it's an ethnic culture, and there are certain things that are expected of us to do. For example, if you're a football player, you may be expected to play to a certain level or have a certain level of grades, because those are expectations for you to have access to whatever activity that it is you're wanting to do. In this example, it's football for the school example. Another example might be perhaps in a culture you are expected to get married by a certain age. And there's all these things, aspects, maybe even like a checklist of things for you to do to complete that, to become eligible or have that accessibility of meeting that standard. Personally, you may have expectations that are goals that you have for yourself. And they may be that you have to have them look a certain way in order for you to consider yourself successful at those goals. And with those personal expectations, I think those can be sometimes the hardest because it's something that we're holding close to us. And it's something that perhaps in this example I'm using, we'd really like to achieve that. And it's not bad. It's just a matter of acknowledging that it's something personal. It's a goal that you want to achieve, and it's something that you're maybe really wrestling with. Maybe it's to do better in school. Maybe it's to stop a bad habit. And then I really like this next one emotionally, because emotionally, I think about the relationship dynamics, whether it's with your parents, friends, other loved ones. Maybe you're in a relationship where perhaps you had a moment where you didn't respond in a way that you felt like you should. And then you're beating yourself up over how you handled the situation rather than choosing to look at it for what it was and identify, okay, this is what happened, and not choosing to do something different next time, but just wallowing in that and thinking you're a horrible person. And I'd like to point out something about this point is the cultural, the personal, and the emotional. Each of these things I think can be related. And in my experience, they can be very much so. Something to keep in mind is this: it's sneaky how they can come up as standards, hopes, or shoulds. I really like looking at it in these three ways, because if you're looking at standards, I kind of touched on this already, but there's a certain level in which you're expected to achieve. Hopes of wanting to reach a certain goal or maybe achieve a certain status if that's something that's important to you, or shoulds, maybe related directly to behavior or whatever it is that you're trying to go for in that way. Something that I stumbled upon, and I like this metaphor. I like this metaphor because it not only feels gentle, it also sounds gentle. And when I say feels gentle, I'm not talking about let's be super touchy-feely about this. What I do mean is, with this thing I came across, it really spoke to me in the sense that it's true, whether we're at school, in our families, in our other relationships. There's these agreements, in a way, if you will, that are unspoken. We're carrying around these invisible scripts, or maybe you'd like to think of them as unspoken contracts. And I think that's important because when you look into different fields of study like sociology or psychology or even human development, there are these things that really are kind of unspoken contracts, and how those are formed. And you can see this is it's through socialization of peers, who your family is, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that that's important that we define that we understand, right, that this is something that we've come into with the world that they create. There's tension that's created by these expectations, whether they're personal, cultural, or emotional. These unspoken contracts that we're all carrying around. And what I mean by this is, I just ran into this not too long ago. There was somebody I met, and it was a public gathering, very kind gentleman. He really only exchanged a few sentences with me, and he wanted a hug. And I said, no, thank you. And, he backed off. He said, okay. And that was great. The challenge came where There was more conversation, again, just a handful of sentences. It was very positive and encouraging, and he wanted me to shake his hand, and I said, "No, thank you," and I could tell he was personally put off, and in the past, I would be very much so willing to give strangers hugs and things like that. Don't get me wrong, I love hugs. One of my love languages is physical touch. However, in the past, when I wasn't comfortable about hugging or shaking hands with people, specifically of the opposite sex or gender, however you want to say that, I was very much so feeling this pressure that I needed to follow through, and I needed to oblige this individual's well-meaning advances. To provide some context as to why this is really important that I'm sharing this with you is because there was a period of life where I was very much so passionate about being on the more orthodox side of my faith and expression with certain things. And one of those things was really being conscientious about the appearance of too much contact physically, even if it was seemingly harmless and such. And then there was a period of time where I was much more open to that. And now I'm finding myself in a place where I'm looking to not recreate, and I would say establishing boundaries that make sense for me because I think that's what I need. And so I think that where I am now, when I was in that place of saying no to this individual warmly and kindly, but also holding that boundary, it was fine for me. And I could tell it created confusion for this other person. It created confusion for this other person because in the setting, it wasn't as if they were used to that, having that be shared with them. I know that because for me and many areas of life, I definitely had the whole people pleaser thing going on. I didn't want to make people upset. So when I had that, I think that it would be something that would stay with me for long periods of time to where it would almost immobilize me from not being able to move forward with the way I wanted to conduct myself because I was so worried about being liked or hurting someone's feelings. And when I held on to that, when I was choosing to allow myself to be in that space where I would just allow seemingly harmless things like hand touches, things like that, or hugs, I was actually compromising my own thoughts and what my own values were at the time. And now being in the place of releasing that expectation and not allowing somebody else's expectation of me to hold me back anymore is incredibly freeing because not only am I in a place where I don't have to worry about their response, I know myself, I know my values and that, and I don't need to be in that space. And I think for me, when this started to happen for me, it was when I realized in this space of life, and I'll use this in the context of dating because it's a little easier than talking about a generic community. In the context of dating, if you don't know who you are or what your values are, you're not going to be able to stand with another person and really get to know them if you're not in a space of truly acknowledging and knowing yourself and who you are, because all you're doing is mirroring who they are and who they want you to be, or rather, who you think they want you to be. And that's not very good because if you're going to be a chameleon in one context or another, you're a hypocrite. And with all the things that I experienced with dating, I hadn't really dated at all until really, I would say early 30s. There were a handful of different people throughout life where I was attracted to them, or there was mutual attraction, and there was talking and things like that. Nothing ever really happened, anything like that. And it wasn't until I temporarily stepped away from a more conservative expression of myself as a person, not just in the faith realm, but in general. What I noticed happening was I was more willing to cross over and do things that I normally wouldn't do. Now, for some people on the outside looking in, they might say, "That's fantastic. You were exploring, you were adventuring, you were doing great things with that." And sure, there's some experiences I can say that I really enjoyed or found fascination with, and it didn't really last. And so, what I found out about myself was, what I found out about myself was in that space was just because I was doing the thing that some people in my life were encouraging me to do. They had this expectation that I should explore and do all these things so I could get the understanding or find out what I like and don't like in a person or a man. And yes, to a degree, it was helpful. And there was some detriment to it. There are some things that I wouldn't want to repeat. And to be clear, nothing crazy or over the top regrets. And at the same time, there are things that I know I would rather have done differently. We all have those things. And specifically, what I'm referring to is like, I would have rather only kissed my husband on my wedding day, not my wedding day, but I would only wanted to kiss one man. I can't say that anymore. And at the same time, that's where I was at. And I get to be with that. And I think one of the things with all of this, and I know this is getting pretty personal, wasn't really expecting to go on this route, and here we are, is that for me, I held the expectation of over here, I have to be this way. I can't do anything out of a toe out of line. I got to be absolutely perfect. It was really unhealthy to be, I can't mess up ever. Really hard on myself. I can still be that way. And then for me, it was like way over here of, whatever, who cares? But the thing is that for people who know me, they might see it as, well, you were over here and your version of over here is actually right here for normal people, whatever that means. So going back to the original story, and my hope is that you're still with me and you're seeing the connection that I'm making here, is that one of the places that I had this moment of understanding of letting go, I was having a conversation with a good friend, and she and I were talking about, at this time, this was back in 2019, I had been talking with a young man. There wasn't a formal dating situation. It was more of we talked a lot and we did a handful of things together. And then we ended up going on a volunteer trip to Israel with a group that brought believers all over the world to help out in Judea and Samaria. And with this individual, we were talking about the possibility of exploring getting married. And this person was close to both of us. And this was after things had sort of settled, all of that, because surprise, spoiler alert, I'm not married to that person, and that's okay. It's a good thing for both of us. Beautiful discovery through that. One of the things she said to me, this had to have been later, and it was when I was in a place of exploring, if I recall correctly. And I remember saying to her, "Barbara, man, I did these things, XYZ, 1, 2, 3, and I didn't do this right, or I did this." And she goes, and I'll be honest, I don't actually remember the wisdom that she laid down on me in that moment. What I do remember is what she said the word and. And is so important because in language, when you look at it, if you say but, it's an automatic wall. Like, okay, here's this wall. Oh, whatever else doesn't even matter. It's just negated. If you say something and then you say and, it connects the two. It's like a bridge. So I think that was one of the spaces where I started beginning to kind of get the idea that it's okay to let go. And there were other times in life with different things, with different friendships or other things I worked through where there was some of that connection to starting to let go and realizing that there is another side to being in spot A and then getting over here to B and then to C way over there down at the train station. The point of what I'm getting at is when I started to allow myself to let it go, when I started giving it to God and really praying into those things, there really was a peace, or as I like to use the Hebrew word shalom. There was really a strong sense of that peace and that completeness and wholeness that I realized it was going to be okay and moving forward. And it wasn't a defining factor that I was willing to give up my life for this man and live in a certain way and really not even be aware if it was going to be a good life. There was just a lot of things that I needed to heal in myself, even though I was so pushing for that because I had that expectation that I wanted to be married by a certain time and all of that stuff. And when I let that go with that person, and even when I moved into a new space of putting more of an expectation on each person that I came across, and this was a pattern that I had had from the time I was young because my parents had a really beautiful love story. I thought, they were friends in high school. They weren't dating in high school, they were friends in high school. But they ended up getting married when dad, I think, got out of boot camp for the Marines and mom was a week away from 18. But anyway, different times then. That was in the 70s. The point is I so wanted that and I had that expectation to have their story or similar story and then acknowledging that it's really not in my control in the sense of how it happens. It's okay to have that heart to want to be married and to move into that direction. And it's not necessarily going to look like how I want it to look. And there is such a release in that and such a peace for me being a person of faith. I know that God's got it and I get to walk into the steps that He has for me. What an honor. That's a place of victory for me because I'm not worrying and pining after things. It's also the same thing, though, with having expectations for a goal. Most of the time, when I really put my mind to it and I say, I have my sights on that over there, woo, I'll go for it and I'll go for it. I'm not paying attention to the how, but I want it. And, you know, I would say most of the time I would get it because I would just have that drive to go forward. But, whoa, and it didn't necessarily look the way I wanted it to. And I noticed the difference between where I was really looking for it to be a certain way and I would hold on to it tight. The difference from when it would be when I would do this thing that a pastor's now wife, they've been married for years now, at the time they were dating. And she used to say, just have your hand open and just think of it as like a flower, like a rose sitting on your hand and just hold it tight enough where it won't fall, slip through your fingers, but don't squeeze it to death because then the Lord's going to have to pry it out of your hands. And whether you're a faith person or not, I think it's very true that we get to think of our goals and stuff in the same way. Because if we're pushing to a point where we're having something not work because we've tried it the same way bajillion times, isn't that the definition of insanity? So we're going to go back. I talked a lot about some personal experiences, some aspects with that. I want to touch the next thing. Really, I guess you consider it a part, what letting go really means. So, if we're thinking about goals in particular, I know I spent some time talking about relational things, relationships, and it's really the same idea. And at the same time, though, it's the same for goals. They go hand in hand because it is a relationship. I'll get there. I get really excited. If you know me, you understand. But letting go is liberation. Letting go is liberation. It's not an abandonment. I'll say it one more time. Letting go is liberation, not abandonment. What I mean is the moment when you choose to stop, and I don't mean stop in the name of love. I mean stop. When you stop obsessing over how other people receive you, performing at the most perfect level, having to be perfect in keeping timelines and outcomes. Once you allow yourself to let go of those things, it's the game changer. I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the little examples that I mentioned. The letting go of how others receive you, letting go of needing to prove or perform, and then letting go of timelines or perfect outcomes. I'd like to be specific about these because I don't want people to hear what I'm saying and take it as it's a get out of jail free card of be like, I don't want you to be in a place of thinking, well, Liliana or Lily said that I can be a jerk because I can let go of how others receive me. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is if you know who you are, what you value, what you stand for, what you do not, you will not allow other people's opinions or ways they perceive you, how they respond to you, bother you if you know that you are grounded in yourself, that you are being true to how you were created to be, as how I would see it. Other people might not see it that way. That's okay. But you're here and you have, as I said way back in the very first podcast, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. And that includes the areas you get to work on and your strengths. And that doesn't mean that other people have the right to judge that. And taking it a step further, they can choose to make judgments. You don't have to take on and wear those things as a garment for yourself. If people close to you who know you well are giving you genuine feedback, that's a beautiful thing. If they're being genuine about it and saying, hey, I see you need to work on this or that, there's nothing wrong with that. That's a gift. Letting go of needing to prove or perform. I like this one because this can easily go into the last one that we were talking about. And what's present for me is the aspect of what it looks like in relationships. How many times, if you're a woman and you're listening here, there are times when you discover a new person. He's really cute. He seems kind or cool or whatever the perception is initially. And you're discovering and connecting and doing all of that. There's this temptation to want to align yourself to that person early or even prove yourself worthy of them or to perform for them. And what that can look like is wanting to be around them or doing the same things that they like to do and not ever having an opinion and just wanting to get the goal of earning love, their love. And let me tell you, when you acknowledge in yourself that you're acting out of fear of abandonment or you're not wanting to not have this person merely for the sake of saying that you don't have them, and you stop yourself and you realize your worth, and who you are and your gifts and talents, and you let go of the idea of needing someone to need someone, and you go, oh, you know, I am whole and complete just as I am, and that's okay. I don't need to be running around in this circus thing of jumping through hoops to get this person to like me. The other thing I had in my head was I literally saw a picture of a hamster running on a wheel that never stops. But when you let go of that needing to prove or perform, there's a freedom in it because, as I mentioned earlier with the comment about the gentleman who wanted to initiate physical contact with me in a merely platonic manner, I realized that when I had that boundary, there was nothing there for me because I knew this is my boundary. This is what I'm setting. And it's challenging. It's not something that's easy. It's going to take you time. It's going to take you time to do that. And when you choose to do that for yourself, letting go of needing that person's approval, something you can do to ask yourself to check is, am I proud of me? If I'm sitting by myself in my room or in my kitchen or in my office, and I'm personally thinking about something that occurred in the day, I find myself in some way or another, it may not be the exact words that I'll give you or offer you. And at the same time, it's very similar of how did I respond in that moment? Okay, this is how I responded. Am I proud of this? Yes or no? What can I do differently next time? Those are some things. When you start allowing yourself to look at your actions specifically in an objective way, and you're not allowing yourself to get all warped up into feelings about it, it's such a game changer. And let me tell you, that's an incredible gift. It really, really is. So, this last one regarding letting go of timelines or perfect outcomes, this directly relates to the past too as well. They all bleed into each other. One thing I know about myself is I can struggle with timelines. And also, there's this idea in my head at times, sometimes more often than I'd like to admit, I'd like things to occur perfectly as I see them fit, not as the creator of the universe. And let's be honest, when I notice that about myself and I'm going through work, because with my job as a special education teacher, there are times where there are timelines that need to happen. And I get to plan ahead to make sure that I meet those timelines. And as a human being, if I don't, it's super challenging and it's very tempting for me to want to bang my head against a brick wall because I didn't do it fast enough or right enough or whatever. There's grace, thankfully. And same thing with perfect outcomes. I mentioned before earlier in this podcast that there are times where I wanted to be married by a certain time. I have had opportunities in life where I really wanted certain things to look a certain way. And surprise, they didn't. They looked totally different. Not bad at all, just different. And noting the thing about my job, I've noticed that there are certain things where I can be gentler with myself, and I choose to be gentler with myself so I don't burn out. And with the perfect outcomes, such as the married thing, other goals I've set for myself, I'm allowing myself to still have those dreams. And I'm also at a place where I can honestly say that I have these dreams and I'll have them. I'll add this piece. Lord willing, I'll have them. And it doesn't mean it's going to look like I want it to, and that's okay. So I think the big thing is that letting go of expectations is liberation, not abandonment. I'd like you to check in with yourself. I'd like for you to ask yourself this question. If you have a journal, I'd love for you to write it in there and really get honest with yourself. Where am I holding too tight? Where am I holding tight to expectations? What could soften if I release just one of them? Another way to think of it is, what area of life am I holding on to too tightly for an expectation, a hope, or a dream? And what would happen if I loosened my grip on that? This has been an incredibly jam-packed podcast. I did not have expectations for this. I'm so overjoyed. Thanks for being here. You could be anywhere and you chose to be here. Guys, you've been so amazing this evening. What an honor to be with you. Really, thank you for choosing to be here, because you could be anywhere and you chose to be here. Now, wherever you are, whether it's morning, noon, or night, I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next time.